E aí, a Argentina vai dolarizar a sua economia? E como é que fica sua dívida astronômica em relação a tudo isso? Eu tive a oportunidade de conversar com Michael Pérez, talvez um dos mais influentes economistas em atividade hoje no mundo, e ele vai falar sobre isso com a gente. Eu sou Cláudio Garcia e estamos começando Conexão Global. O presidente Milei, novamente, deu vários sinais trocados em relação ao futuro da economia da Argentina. Ao mesmo tempo que ele indicou o Caputo para ministro das Finanças da Argentina, uma pessoa mais estável, com alguma reputação no mercado financeiro, ele também decidiu ou disse que vai sair dos BRICS, que tem uma intenção de criar uma moeda para concorrer com o dólar. Para falar sobre isso tudo, eu conversei hoje com Michael Pérez, professor da Peking University e talvez um dos maiores economistas em atividade, na minha opinião, hoje no mundo. O Michael tem opiniões bem diferentes em relação à dolarização e principalmente em relação à dívida argentina. Vamos ver como foi a entrevista. Today the idea is to talk a little bit about like Argentina, and all the challenge we have just got like a new president that will take over in December 10th, and we are seeing that he has a very strong speech around like dollarization, around like closing the central bank, and that's what I wanted to explore with you, not the political side, more the implications of these decisions in case they are taken. So that's the idea today. So the first one that I want to explore with you is the dollarization. It looks like, a lot of people don't understand completely, I'd say, or at least like they don't analyze completely the implications of dollarizing an economy. In one of your recent posts, I saw that you say, hey, eventually, supposing that they are able to get the money, and making the dollarization happen, depending how the United States economy decide to go, or, it can be good or can be bad, and that's what I want to explore with you. The consequence of dollarization in case Argentina is able to revert to a dollar-based economy.
Yeah, I think the key point is that by dollarizing, Argentina gives up control of its own currency, which may be a good thing or a bad thing. I think different people in Argentina will make different arguments there. But it's not as if there's no longer anything that affects the currency. Now what affects the currency is basically US monetary policy. So, in the gold standard days, what really determined the expansion or contraction of the gold supply globally was gold discoveries. So when large amounts of gold were discovered in California or in South Africa or in Australia or in Alaska, we saw major expansions in the money supply, which tended to be good for economic growth globally. And during periods in which we didn't see major expansions of gold, the economy often struggled. And Argentina is now adopting a kind of gold standard, but it's a dollar standard. So that means when the US expands the money supply, that might expand money in Argentina, regardless of whether or not Argentina needs an expansion in the money supply. And of course, if the US tightens the money supply, that will tighten money in Argentina, whether or not that's optimal for the Argentine economy. And, I used the example of the currency board back in 1991, I think it was, the convertibility. Argentina didn't dollarize, but it created a currency board, which is very similar to dollarization. In theory, the amount of pesos were exactly equal to the amount of dollars held by the currency board. And while the purpose of that was to constrain the ability of local governments to spend wildly, in the end, it didn't work that way for reasons that had very little to do with Argentina. In the 1990s, we saw a massive expansion of liquidity, and money flowed all over the world into risky assets everywhere in the world, including into Argentina. So that even though Argentina had placed itself in a very strict dollarized economy, the amount of dollars exploded. And in the end, we saw in Argentina no real constraint on the spending of the Argentine government. And so they continued to spend, debt grew very rapidly. And by the end of the 1990s, Argentina was once again in trouble. So, the point that I would make is not that dollarization is going to solve the problems or worsen the problems in Argentina. It's that dollarization makes it very difficult to predict what the outcome will be, because what Argentina needs from its money supply and what Argentina gets from its money supply are two completely different things.
Yeah, it's very well said. And there is also like implications for trade as well. For example, United States right now, you comment that in your articles, is not that the United States is not competitive or has not a good industry, but it's because the way that the balance of payments are arranged today, even for political reasons, because there are classes from your last book, you say that have interest in the way that it is right now, it cannot shift the trade. And adopting the dollar, maybe there will be huge implications for trade for Argentina as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, basically, the capital account and the current account must always be in perfect balance. And the point that I make about the U.S. is that as long as foreigners want to acquire assets, and foreigners generally want to acquire dollar assets, that means that the net flow of dollars into the United States is not controlled by the U.S., it's controlled by foreigners. But it's the flip side of the U.S. current account deficit. So as long as foreigners want to buy dollars, the U.S. must run a current account deficit in order to accommodate that buying of dollars. The point that I make in relationship to Argentina is a little bit different. As you know, Argentina is restructuring its external debt. It has real problems with external debt. And the point that I try to make in the US and in Europe is that we often think about these debt restructurings as a conflict between the borrowing country and the lending country. So to the extent that Argentina owes money to American and European entities, we think of debt restructuring as a conflict between Argentine borrowers and American and European lenders. But that's not really what's happening. Debt restructuring affects not just the lenders in Europe and the US, but also workers, businesses, farmers, etc. And the reason I say that is because every dollar that a country earns, whether from the trade account or the capital account, must be recycled back through the trade account or the capital account. So one way of thinking about that is that because nobody is lending money to Argentina, no one is investing in Argentina, Argentina earns dollars by exporting. Now, those dollars can be recycled in the form of imports, or they can be recycled in the form of debt payments, which is why I argue that the debate over debt restructuring is as much a debate between different sectors of the American and European economies as it is between the creditors and the debtors. So if you care about American workers, American businesses, American producers, then what you want is as the maximum amount of debt forgiveness possible, because you don't want Argentines to spend their dollars on debt. You want them to spend their dollars on imports from farmers, producers, workers, etc. That matters a lot. So from the point of view of the United States or Europe, what I argue is that the US government, the various European governments, China, should be encouraging the most efficient restructuring for the Chinese economy. In other words, if creditors get less, that's not a bad thing, because that means that producers, workers, farmers get more. And what we really want to do in a world of weak demand is to expand demand. That's why I've argued for a while that the US government, the European governments, the Chinese government should get more aggressively involved in debt restructuring and they should support what may seem counterintuitive, but greater debt forgiveness rather than less debt forgiveness.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point, and I want to explore that a bit more. That is, for example, a recent article from The Economist. They say, "Hey, Argentina shouldn't dollarize the economy. They should default. They should default the economy right now, as they had done like many times in the past." And I like your approach because it's different. It's not default, that takes all the ownership of only Argentina, and there are a lot of consequences of the default, like credibility. But you're saying, no, I mean, why we don't plan a better debit forgiven that will completely like shift like the flow of money for different classes, different groups in the world. So my question to you in this case is, why so difficult a debt forgiven? Because in my mind there is this IMF kind of playbook, that you need to follow the rules because you show that you are able to do that. Some people believe that if you forgive the debt, people will not learn the lessons. Just wanted to explore your thoughts on this side.
Well, the history is very clear. Countries that default on their debt and that minimize their debt repayments are not punished as severely as we're told. Basically, why would anyone lend to Argentina? They would lend to Argentina because they think that Argentine growth is very high and there's a high probability of their getting repaid. The history of debt restructurings in Argentina will matter less, so that if we could do a debt restructuring in Argentina that would allow the economy to grow, people would lend once again to Argentina, even if the restructuring involves significant debt forgiveness. Now, creditors don't like it when you say that, because what you're basically saying is a significant amount of debt forgiveness generated by default doesn't penalize a country. But the historical precedents are pretty clear. It doesn't penalize a country. I remember when I first started trading Latin American debt, Peru, which was considered one of the most intransigent of all of the countries, its debt was trading at 5 cents on the dollar, and they got significant debt forgiveness. By the mid to late 1990s, they were one of the darlings of the market. Everybody was eager to lend to Peru because they expected Peruvian growth to be quite high. So the point really there is that we lend to countries because of their future growth prospects, not because of their previous debt history. But the point that I really want to make is that in the United States, in Europe, in China, people who want to boost domestic demand rather than boost domestic savings, of which we have too much, should be also supporting maximum amounts of debt forgiveness. The less money countries like Argentina, and there are many countries with debt problems, the less money they spend on debt, the more money they spend on imports, which is really what the world needs.
I get it. Why so difficult that? Because it's clear that we have a demand problem, so it's not a liquidity problem. So you say a lot of that in your book. I mean, what would be a way to start like having a different conversation on this?
I think part of the reason we don't have a conversation is because of this perception that debt restructuring is really an issue for creditors and borrowers. It doesn't affect me as a worker, it doesn't affect me as a farmer or as a business. And I think we need to shift that perception. We need to make people realize in the creditor countries that everybody is affected by the debt restructuring. Some people benefit, basically creditors benefit from a minimal amount of debt restructuring, but different sectors, workers, farmers, producers, benefit from a maximum amount of restructuring. By leaving it to the banks, of course, what's really happening is that the restructuring is occurring in the best interests of the banks rather than in the best interest of the creditor economy. It's very hard to get people to understand that. We think of debt restructuring as very complicated, let's leave it to the experts. What we don't recognize is that the experts have a very clear point of view, which is not necessarily the same point of view of the rest of the economy.
Just my last question, Michael, is what would you recommend for Argentina at this moment? I mean, as you said, it's not like an Argentinian decision per se. There is a lot of decisions that need to be made in Europe or US and other places as well. But if you were like to see the president of Argentina right now, which direction would you take?
I wish I had an answer. None of us have an answer. What's interesting about Argentina is, I'm sure you've heard the cliche. Some people say there are three types of economies: advanced economies, developing economies, and Argentina. Argentina seems to have a set of problems that are very, very difficult to resolve. My intuition is that these are really domestic political economy problems, and they have to be resolved domestically. Until they are, playing around with different financial and monetary systems doesn't really address the problem. So will dollarization work? Well, we forget that Argentina basically dollarized in the early 1990s, a different form of dollarization, but it was dollarization. And we had a great 3 or 4 years, not great for the economy, great for owners of assets. Asset prices soared, but ultimately it didn't resolve Argentina's problems. So, I'm very suspicious of the idea that with the right set of monetary conditions, Argentina's problems can be solved.
That's very good. That's very good. Michael, that's it. I mean, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for speaking. It's late night for you. So we'll be in touch. Eventually in the future, we'll invite you again to come to talk about other topics. There are so many areas that you touch that are very insightful, for me at least. And I hope it will be for all the audience here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudio. I'd be happy to do it.
Uma das maiores contribuições que o Michael traz para essa discussão da Argentina é em relação a como se tratar a dívida da Argentina, que talvez é o maior problema por trás de todas as intenções de mudar o país. A maioria dos países que recebem ajuda financeira do FMI ou do Banco Mundial, de qualquer outra instituição global financeira, sempre tem essa cartilha tradicional que eu te dou dinheiro, mas você tem que tomar medidas austeras que vão impactar a qualidade da sua população, que vão impactar a qualidade do seu país e que não necessariamente vão gerar o resultado, como a gente tem visto ao longo da história, que se espera do investimento feito, do empréstimo feito. O Michael traz uma outra ideia. Ele diz o seguinte, que a maioria desses investimentos criam dívidas que na hora que a Argentina consegue gerar dinheiro ou qualquer outro país para pagar essa dívida vai para o mercado financeiro, vai para uma parte da balança de pagamentos que não beneficia geração de emprego, que não beneficia a sociedade. Em vez disso daí, o Michael propõe perdoar a dívida da Argentina. E ele mostra, e ele sugere que a dívida da Argentina, ou qualquer dívida perdoada, na hora que a Argentina começa a gerar lucros, ou começa a gerar excesso de reservas, esse dinheiro circula na economia global através da outra parte do balança de pagamentos, que impacta o trade, que impacta as economias locais, a agricultura, a fábrica, os empregos tradicionais que vão exportar serviços e produtos para outros lugares, o que gera muito mais emprego e gera um fluxo muito mais saudável de geração de demanda, de geração de emprego, de geração de pessoas querendo comprar algo, o que é o que está faltando na economia do mundo, segundo ele. O que você acha disso tudo? Você acha que perdoar a dívida argentina reforçaria os comportamentos do passado, de gastos excessivos pelo governo? Você acharia que perdoar a dívida da Argentina poderia funcionar como Michael mostra que aconteceu historicamente? Queria ouvir muito você. Comente, curta, compartilha e te vejo no próximo Conexão Global.